What's up guys, it's Eric from Rare Candy, and today we're going to be counting down our top 10 cards from the latest Sun and Moon set, Celestial Storm. So with a set over 160 cards, there was no shortage of potential inclusions, but somehow we managed to narrow it down to just 10 cards for this list. And of course too, if you want to hear more about some of the other cards from the set, maybe that didn't make this list, definitely be sure to check out our Celestial Storm set review as well, link down below in the description. And before we get to the actual countdown, just to set up some rules for this list, only one rarity of each card will be allowed. So as an example, Rayquaza GX can only be listed once despite there being 3 different versions of the card in the set. And also, no reprints that already exist in the current standard format will be eligible to appear, meaning cards like Rare Candy can't make an appearance, but other reprints that aren't in the current format like Acro Bike can. But enough chatting, let's head into the list and see what made the cut. So before we get to the number 10 spot on our list, we actually do have an honorable mention we're going to go over really quick. And so like I mentioned earlier, this set is absolutely massive. It's 168 cards, excluding secret rares and rainbow rares. So inevitably there are going to be a couple of cards that didn't quite make the cut on our list. And the one that we're going to be talking about here is Celesteela. So Celesteela is an Ultra Beast Pokemon that came out in Celestial Storm, has 140 HP, 4 retreat cost, resistance to fighting, lightning weakness, and just a single attack called Moonraker. For 5 energy, it does 160 damage, but if the total amount of prizes remaining for both players is 6, this attack can be used for a single metal energy. So just as an example, if you have 4 prizes remaining, your opponent has 2, and the total is 6 in total, you can use Moonraker for just a single metal energy. So even though this attack is a bit situational, it is a fantastic attack nonetheless, because 160 is actually a very important number. So not only can you knock out virtually every non-EX, non-GX Pokemon that is running around, but with a choice band you hit for 190, which is a very important number to hit for. So think of Buzzwole GX, 190 HP, Duskmane Necrozma, 190 HP, Dawnwing's Necrozma GX, 180 HP. So with a choice band, Moonraker is going to be knocking out pretty much most every basic EX and basic GX that is in the game. So that's why I think this card does have so much potential. It's such an easy inclusion in a number of decks, everything from Metal Magnezone variants to maybe Metal Naganadel variants like the Naganadel Stakataka deck that looks to have a little bit of hype coming out of Celestial Storm. So it's just an easy 1 energy attacker that you can throw in basically any deck that runs metal energy in some count. Even decks that run unit energy. Think of something like Zoroark Garbodor, which has seen unit energy to be able to use Kartana GX as well. Celesteela could be another potential 1 energy attacker in these types of decks that have access to attacking with this guy for just a single attachment. So the card does have a great attack, but ultimately it is very, very situational. You're not guaranteed to be able to use this attack every game, and even if both players do have 6 prizes, this might not even necessarily be your ideal attacker on that particular turn too. So the fact that this card is a little bit situational is why it didn't quite make the cut, but nevertheless it does have a great attack, fantastic weakness and resistance as well, and Ultra Beasts have a decent amount of support. So definitely a card with some potential, but ultimately didn't quite make the cut. So coming in at the number 10 spot on our list is going to be a new Swampert. So Swampert, of course, is a Stage 2 Pokemon. This guy has 160 HP, 3 retreat cost, grass weakness, but it has this ability, Power Draw, once during your turn before you attack. You may discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 3 cards. And then it has an attack called Hydro Pump for 3 colorless energy. It has 80 plus 20 more for each water energy attached to this Pokemon. So Swampert has a couple of cool things going for it. It has 160 HP, which is quite tanky for just a 1 prize attacker. Hydro Pump is one of those attacks that has kind of like an infinite damage cap. Since, you know, the more energy you stack on the Swampert, the more damage that you're going to do. And water has a bunch of different support right now as far as water energy support, like Aqua Patch, just as an example, will allow us to attach water energies from our discard pile to our Swampert, just as an example. Then even in the future, looking ahead a little bit, there is a new Quagsire as well that has a little bit of synergy with Swampert as well. But really, I think what makes this card so exciting is that ability, Power Draw. So Zoroark GX has been one of the most dominant cards in the current format for a while now, and that's been thanks to its ability Trade. And Power Draw is literally just a strict upgrade to Trade. Granted, it makes a little bit of sense. Swampert is a little bit more difficult to get into play than something like a Zoroark GX, since it is a stage 2, and you need things like rare candies and things of that nature to get this guy out. So it's only fitting that Pokemon is rewarding you for getting out this more difficult Pokemon by giving it a better ability. And that's really why Swampert is so exciting, is for this ability Power Draw. And even outside of dedicated Swampert decks, in the expanded format, we have things like Archie's Ace in the Hole, which will allow you to bypass traditional evolution methods and get Swampert into play very quickly that way, and could function as a good support Pokemon potentially in the expanded format at some point as well. So Swampert has a lot of things going for it. There's even a new Magcargo in the set that has synergy with Power Draw. You can put a card on top of your deck and immediately draw that plus 2 others with Power Draw. So this card, at a glance, I think looks very strong, but I do think there are a few drawbacks to it, which are, kind of the reason why it's a little bit lower on this list. So grass weakness right now, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not the best either, since we do have things like KirbyIsOP GX running around that can easily knock this guy out in one hit. And even though it hasn't been as popular in recent months, Tapu Bulu GX is still a card in the format that does see some degree of play as well. So there are some popular cards right now that can actually easily one-hit knock out your Swampert, but a couple of other things are going against it as well. The fact that Aqua Patch only accelerates to the bench is a little bit troublesome at times in my experience with Swampert as its own deck, because a lot of times you want to accelerate to the active in a lot of cases, and Aqua Patch does not allow you to do that. And also, too, the card, it's just not as efficient of an attacker just in general as things like Zoroark GX, which it does share some parallels with in terms of its abilities. So Hydro Pump is a pretty powerful attack, but it's a lot harder to get up and running and actually take one-hit knockouts with, as opposed to, like I said, another Pokemon like Zoroark GX that does share a similar ability. So even though it does have a couple of good things going for it, the fact that it's inconsistent being a stage 2 and its attack, even though strong, it is a little bit harder to get going, are going to be some things that are going to hold Swampert back a little bit. But nevertheless, this card is very exciting, and that's why it still is coming in at number 10 on our countdown. So coming in at the number 9 spot is going to be Copycat. This is actually going to be one of those reprints that is going to be allowed on this list. So even though Copycat is a reprint, this is a card that we really haven't had in a long time. I believe at the end of the 2011-2012 format was the last time this card was actually legal for play. So we are finally getting it back into the game, and let's take a look at it. It is a supporter, like I mentioned, but you shuffle your hand into your deck and then draw a card for each card in your opponent's hand. So one thing that's very important to note is that we are losing a lot of very powerful draw supporters in this rotation that's coming up in September. We're really only going to be left with Cynthia, which is, of course, a great supporter on its own, but we're going to need additional ways to draw cards and ensure that decks can remain consistent and have good forms of draw power in the post-rotation format. And I think Copycat is going to be one of the potential substitute cards that we might start to see going into this post-rotation format, and maybe even in some counts for the Worlds format as well. At the time of filming, the World Championships have not yet happened, so Copycats could still even make a splash in Nashville this year whenever Celestial Storm is going to be illegal as well. So this is actually pretty powerful, because think of something like a Zoroark GX deck. Every turn they're using that ability trade to draw cards, filling their hand up to, massive sizes, and sometimes Copycat is a great way at punishing them for amassing such a gigantic hand in that way. But even in decks that aren't Zoroark GX, a lot of the times you're going to just draw a nice amount of cards with this supporter. So most times you'll probably draw anywhere between 4 to 7 cards on average, I would say. And without something like N in the post-rotation format, hand sizes aren't going to be constantly lowered and punished, I think, quite as frequently as they have been in the current format. So I think Copycat will have a lot of chance to actually refill your hand to a decent size. And there are various cards that Copycat has synergy with. There is a Shiftry GX in Celestial Storm that actually has a good bit of synergy with this card, since it does more damage if both players have the same amount of cards in hand. So Copycat will actually help those types of strategies, in addition to just being a solid form of draw power, like I said, especially in the case of the post-rotation format going forward. Nevertheless, though, this is a card, though strong, it isn't going to be a card you can build build your entire deck around. So a lot of decks play, you know, 4 Sycamore in a lot of cases, or 4 N, or 4 Cynthia. Copycat you probably will not see in those types of counts just because it is a little bit more situational. Sometimes players will play down their hand to a low hand size and only have maybe 2 to 3 cards left ready to go. So that's why Copycat is not going to be quite as high on the list as something like Cynthia was whenever we did our top 10 Ultra Prism cards, just as an example. It's just a little bit more situational, but nevertheless, it's definitely a strong card that we expect to see some degree of play. And speaking of Shiftry GX, coming in at the number 8 spot, we have our first Pokemon GX of the countdown, and that is going to be Shiftry GX. So let's take a look at this guy. It's 240 HP, Grass type Stage 2 Pokemon GX, weak to fire, 2 retreat cost, pretty expected things there. But it has 3 different attacks we can go over, the first of which is going to be Perplex for a Grass energy, does 40 damage and confuses your opponent's active Pokemon. Its next attack, Extra Sensory for a Grass and double colorless energy, does 90, plus 90 more if both players have the same amount of cards in hand. And then its GX attack, Den of Iniquity GX for the same attack cost as Extra Sensory. You choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, your opponent shuffles this Pokemon, and all cards attached to it into their deck. So like I just mentioned, in the case of Copycat, there are certain strategies where cards like that can benefit, and Shiftry GX is one of those cards. So Extra Sensory is the big attack we're really focusing in on here. If both players have the same amount of cards in hand, you can do 180 damage, plus a choice band is going to be 210, which knocks out most of the relevant Pokemon in the current format. Think of Zoroark GX, Ultra Necrozma GX, Buzzwole GX, Lycanroc GX. Shiftry GX is going to be able to make quick work of a lot of these Pokemon. Now, of course, there are going to be a couple of Pokemon that are a little bit outside this knockout range. Think of something like a Gardevoir GX, just as an example, that has 230 HP, or even maybe some of the other Stage 2 GXs like Metagross that have 250. Those are going to be a little bit outside of Shiftry's range, but nevertheless, Extra Sensory is a very powerful attack that can definitely knock out a lot of different things that we currently have. So not only do we have Copycat as a means of matching hand sizes, we also have Judge in the format as well, and even going into post-rotation, we still have both Copycat and Judge. And also pre-rotation, of course, we still have N, which is a great card to influence the hand sizes of both players. And then there's all sorts of different Pokemon that exist in the current format that can help with this as well. I think the most notable of which is going to be Zoroark GX, just because that trade ability will allow you to draw extra cards, maybe sometimes matching the hand sizes to help your Shiftries take one-hit knockouts. So Shiftry has a very, very powerful attack in the form of Extra Sensory, and it's actually pretty manageable to power up. Just 2 energy attachments, or if you're playing a Zoroark variant, there's even other things like Multi-Switch you could play, or even the Masked Royal card that came out in this set as well. So there are different ways to even power this thing up in one go as well. So Shiftry GX does look to be a bit promising. Now, we'll say in the pre-rotation format, Shiftry GX is a Stage 2, and right now Stage 2s aren't the greatest. They are a little bit too slow most of the time, since right now we have a pretty aggressive format, since Buzzwole decks are very, very speedy. Even Malamar decks are pretty fast and consistent as well. It can really start putting on pressure quickly, and so that kind of puts Stage 2 Pokemon in a bit of an awkward spot, but nevertheless, I do still think the card has a lot of potential, and even going into post-rotation, the card looks to have a little bit more wiggle room to potentially stretch its legs and be a bit more of a formidable force in the metagame. So that's why Shiftry is coming in at the number 8 spot on this countdown. Up next, at the number 7 spot on our list, we have a stadium card called Shrine of Punishment. I gotta say, guys, you've probably heard me talk about this in other videos if you've been following this channel for a while, but I've personally been very excited for this card to come back. It's kind of the spiritual successor to the old Desert Ruins card from back in the day that would punish Pokemon EX. And so it's kind of been updated for today's standards in the form of Shrine of Punishment. So between turns, put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX, both yours and your opponent's. So Pokemon GX have been dominating the metagame for a long time now, ever since they have come out all the way back in Sun and Moon. And even before that, of course, Pokemon EX were kind of the big force in the metagame. So Shrine of Punishment is a fantastic card to see that can lend some aid to potential non-GX based decks as a means of maybe bridging the gap in power a little bit. And also too, spread decks are still something we have seen in the past have success, and Shrine of Punishment definitely seems like a good fit for these types of decks. Now, of course, we do still have things like Potown in the current format that fill kind of a similar role in terms of putting damage counters on evolution Pokemon, but Shrine of Punishment is on any Pokemon as long as they are a GX or EX. There's no extra catches to the card like in the case of something like Potown. And one thing that's great too about Shrine of Punishment is that if your opponent does not have a Field Blower or a Stadium card of their own to remove this from play, this damage is going to add up very quickly. So if they go an entire turn without getting rid of this card, that's going to be 3 damage counters in total at the very least on all of their Pokemon EX and GX, since they'll take 1 damage counter after the turn you play it, an additional damage counter if they don't remove the Stadium card, and then another damage counter after your next turn going into another turn of theirs. So if they don't remove this in play, this can actually be very, very problematic for them. So think of something like Zoroark variants. Let's just say Zoroark Lycanroc just as an example. A lot of times in the mid game, their board will look something like 3 Zoroarks, a Lycanroc, and maybe a Tapu Lele or 2 or something like that. It's not an uncommon board state to see, and Shrine of Punishment can definitely punish these types of decks that are so reliant on having a field full of GXs. And so I really just enjoy the mechanic of punishing these very, very powerful Pokemon and giving a little bit of a boost to your non-GX Pokemon. So maybe like something like the Swampert we saw earlier on this countdown video, or any other non-GX Pokemon that might be struggling to be quite good enough to really, get its foot in the door as far as being a viable deck. Up next, guys, coming in at the number 6 spot, we have yet again another Pokemon GX, and this is going to be Stakataka GX, one of the new Ultra Beasts that got added in the Ultra Sun and Moon games, of course. So let's take a look at this card. It is, of course, an Ultra Beast, as I mentioned, a basic GX in addition to that. 180 hit points, 3 retreat cost, fire weak, resistant to psychic, all pretty standard stats there. But its ability, Ultra Ball, your Ultra Beast take 10 less damage from your opponent's attacks after applying weakness and resistance. Its first attack, Gigatron Stomp for 2 metal and a colorist, is 120. And then it has Assembly GX for the same attack cost. It does 50 plus 50 more for each prize card that you have taken. So if we do just a quick little survey of the metagame and look at what is seeing play, you'll notice we have actually a lot of Ultra Beasts floating around. We have Buzzwole GX, we have Ultra Necrozma GX, Dawnwings Necrozma GX, Duskmane Necrozma GX. So we have a good bit of stuff floating around that Stakataka looks to potentially give a boost to. And one thing that's important to note too about this ability Ultra Ball is that it actually stacks. So that means if we have 4 Stakataka GX in play, just as an example, your Ultra Beast will take 40 less damage. And a lot of times this is going to make the difference between your opponent taking a 1-hit knockout versus a 2-hit knockout. So that's the main reason Stakataka GX is so exciting to look at. Really does make your Ultra Beast Pokemon a lot tankier. And I think prior to Celestial Storm, Naganadel GX specifically was struggling to find the right partner, and Stakataka GX just might be that Pokemon. But even outside of being a strictly a support Pokemon, I think the attacks on Stakataka are actually pretty decent as well. So Ultra Beast, Metal Pokemon, and Basic Pokemon all have a wide variety of ways to accelerate energy. So we have the Registeel from Crimson Invasion, we have the Solgaleo Prism Star, we have the Metal Magnezone to accelerate energy to this guy, but then we also have things like Max Elixir still in the format until rotation, and of course we still have B-String as well, which can all help accelerate energy to Stakataka. So I think you could play this in just a wide variety of decks. It can maybe be a support Pokemon for Naganadel, like I said, or maybe you could even try it out as its own type of deck instead. I think there's enough different ways to get this guy up and running as an attacker and also just as a support Pokemon. So that's why Stakataka is going to be coming in at the 6th spot on this countdown. Alrighty guys, so we have 5 cards down and 5 left to go, and coming in at the number 5 spot we have Banette GX. And Banette GX is a card I personally have been very excited to see be released in the Celestial Storm set. It's kind of a spiritual successor to the old Banette EX from many, many years ago, just kind of updated for the current state of the game today. But Banette GX is a stage 1 with 190 HP, 1 retreat cost, resistance to fighting, and weakness to dark. Then it has this ability Shady Move. Once during your turn before you attack, if this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, you may move 1 damage counter from one Pokemon to another Pokemon. Its first attack, Shadow Chant, for a single psychic energy is 30 plus 10 more for every supporter card in your discard pile, but you can't add more than 100 damage in this way. And then its GX attack, Tomb Hunt GX, for a single psychic energy. Put 3 cards from your discard pile into your hand. So a lot of different things to cover about this card real quick. Let's go over some of the downsides to this. I think kind of the glaring things that are wrong with this card is first that it's a little bit weaker than some of the other Stage 1 GXs that we currently have. If you look at something like a Golisopod GX that has 210 HP, this guy only has 190 HP, which is going to be a little bit weaker, and it's going to make Banette a little less tanky than some of the other Stage 1s that we have out there. And also, the other big downside is its weakness to Dark. Zoroark GX has been insanely popular ever since it's been released, so having a Dark weak Pokemon is always going to be something that can't be overlooked. On the plus side, it is resistant to fighting. Even though it is weak to dark, being resistant to fighting is actually one of the best types you could possibly resist, especially right now, pre-rotation, since we still have Buzzwole GX, the Baby Buzzwole, Lycanroc GX. They still have things like Regirock EX in the format, Strong, Energy, and a lot of this fighting support that really makes these cards so powerful. So being able to have a Pokemon that is actually resistant to these strong Pokemon that are floating around is going to be really good. So its ability also I don't think should be overlooked as well either. So even though I did say Banette is a little bit weaker in terms of its HP, Shady Move will actually give the card a little bit of tanking potential, but even outside of that, it really helps your math in a lot of situations. So let's look at something like a Tapu Lele GX. Has 170 HP, and any deck I think that can take one-hit knockouts on Tapu Lele with its attackers is going to be a good quality to have to potentially close out games. And that's actually exactly what Banette can do. So if we look at Shadow Chant, if we do the maximum 130 damage the card allows, plus a choice band is going to be 160, and then just moving 1 damage counter to Tapu Lele can actually take a knockout on it. So Banette GX is actually a really solid Pokemon at closing out games, which I think is a very good attribute to have. Also, Tomb Hunt GX, we've seen this attack in the past on the Decidueye GX, which saw an incredible amount of play. Of course, not just for its GX attack, it was more so for its Feather Arrow ability, but it didn't hurt that it had a great GX attack in addition to that ability. So Tomb Hunt GX is definitely not to be overlooked. I actually think, especially post-rotation, this attack even gets a bit better. So right now, currently, Banette GX is primarily been discussed as being a partner for Zoroark decks. Since you're Psychic type, you have great type coverage against those fighting decks that Zoroark normally struggles with. So assuming you're playing this in a Zoroark deck, after we lose things like Special Charge and Puzzle of Time to retrieve double colorless energies, Tomb Hunt GX is actually a fantastic move to get back some of these resources that you won't have access to quite as easily in the post-rotation format. So I actually think that's something that is very interesting about this card. But going back to the ability as well, Banette GX also acts as a great Pokemon to be able to promote when you play things like Guzma. So whenever you play Guzma, you are forced to switch one of your Pokemon. So if you have a Floatstone on your Banette and you play Guzma, you can promote your Banette, make use of Shady Move, and then actually retreat back into something else to maybe keep attacking with. Or even if you just want to attack with Banette, that's fine. This is a 1 energy attacker, hitting for 160 for 1 energy, assuming you have all 10 supporters in the discard pile, is definitely not something to overlook. That means Banette can actually abuse things like Max Potion pretty easily, or Acerola pretty easily, to be able to make Banette tank a little bit more if your opponent is running a deck that can't manage to knock it out quite in one hit. So if you look at any one single attribute about Banette GX, no one attribute of it just screams amazing. It's a combination of the fact that it has so many different solid attributes going for it at one time, which makes this card as strong as it is, and that's why we are putting it at the number 5 spot. So up next, guys, we have our first item card actually of the countdown, and that is going to be Acro Bike. So Acro Bike is a card that we actually lost in last year's rotation, but now that a year has gone by, we have it back in the format. And so let's take a look at it. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put one of them into your hand, and discard the other card. So historically, if we look back at Acro Bike, this card did see a good amount of success in a variety of decks, usually very aggressive decks, things like Night March just as an example, or Vespiquen, even Rayquaza EX, or I'm sorry, Mega Rayquaza EX at one point. Some lists were opting to play things like Acro Bike, and it's just a very powerful form of draw. Item-based form of draw is always something that's very exciting and not to be overlooked, because with a supporter, you play it and then you can't play another one for a whole turn. But with something like Acro Bike, it allows you to dig through your deck a little bit deeper to find key pieces of your strategy that you might not get if you just play your normal supporter. And just looking at a lot of the different decks in the current metagame, I do think there's actually a variety of different decks that potentially could want to abuse something like this. I think one easy example could be something like a Malamar deck. I think pre-rotation especially, Malamar probably doesn't need Acro Bike, but nevertheless it has synergy, and it's an easy example to look at. So Malamar accelerates Psychic Energy out of the discard pile, and Acro Bike is a card that can help you draw through your deck a little bit more, increasing your consistency, and maybe along the way you can dump some Psychic Energy in the discard pile to reuse with your Malamars. So it has synergy with decks like that want cards in the discard to make use of later, but then also it's a great card for very aggressive decks like in the past with stuff like Vespiquen, Night March, etc. And in the case of post-rotation, we're actually losing quite a few of the cards that enable some of the more aggressive decks in the format to exist. So think of Professor Sycamore as a card that we have right now. Discard your hand, draw 7. Fantastic card for a lot of these pure basic decks that look to just dig through their deck very quickly. They're not going to have something like that post-rotation. Also, a lot of these basic aggressive decks are going to lose things like Max Elixir as well. So Acro Bike can be potentially a nice card for some of the more aggressive decks to potentially make use of post-rotation. And also, we are losing some of our supplementary draw power like Octillery, just as another example. So Acro Bike is just a nice form of alternate draw power, and especially in the case of maybe all basic decks or decks that just look to dig through their deck very quickly, even like the new Rayquaza GX, which you'll see on this countdown as well, is another deck that can potentially make use of Acro Bike, just because not only does it want the cards in the discard pile, but it does just look to dig through the deck at a very fast pace. So Acro Bike, it's definitely a card that historically has seen play, and I definitely don't expect that to change now that it's getting thrown back into the format with Celestial Storm, and that's why it's coming in at the number 4 spot. So up next, coming in at the number 3 spot on our list, is going to be our first Prism Star of the countdown in the form of Latias Prism Star. Definitely a card that was probably expected to be kind of high up on this countdown. And it's a pretty straightforward card, only has one single attack, but let's look at why this card does manage to place so high on this list. So Latias Prism Star has 130 HP, which actually is a little bit low for some of these basic Prism Star Pokemon that we've seen get printed, but it has this Dreamy Mist attack for a single colorless energy, does 30 damage, and you attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to each of your basic dragon Pokemon. So one thing I will point out just real quick, in the current standard format, we don't have anything like double dragon energy to make dragon Pokemon more easily able to attack, and that's actually been one reason why a lot of dragon Pokemon haven't been seeing a lot of play, is because their energy costs are very awkward and not always the easiest to get up and running. And a card like Latias Prism Star is going to help out these decks, because you can accelerate any type of energy, and the fact that this attack is colorless is even better too, because that makes this card very flexible, and you can put it into really any dragon deck that you're going to want to. But of course, the big one that we're going to be talking about is going to be the new Rayquaza GX that came out in this set as well. So in the case of Rayquaza GX, it does more damage for every grass and lightning energy in play. And so, of course, something like Dreamy Mist can not only soften up your opponent, but it can get out a lot of energy in the process. If you have 4 Rayquaza GX in play, just as an example, you can do 30 damage and get 4 energy in play with the attack as well. That is a very, very powerful form of energy acceleration. The fact that, like I said, Latias has a partner right out the gate that just has an amazing amount of synergy with this kind of catapulted this card up really high on this list. It's a very straightforward card. We've seen things like this succeed in the past though, like the Solgaleo Prism Star that we got back in Ultra Prism, or probably more notably the baby quote-unquote Yveltal or baby Volcanion that we had out of the XY series as well. Both cards saw an enormous amount of play for their respective archetypes, and Latias Prism Star is actually, I'd say, just a strict upgrade to both of those cards, given the fact that it can accelerate to up to 5 Pokemon in total, whereas Yveltal would only accelerate to 1, and then Volcanion would only accelerate to 2, and did less damage than Yveltal did as well. So Latias Prism Star, I would even maybe go as far as to say it's the best form of one of these one energy, energy accelerating support Pokemon like this. And like I said, the fact that it has Rayquaza GX and Celestial Storm to pair with it right away is the reason why this card is ranking so high on this list. So just 2 cards left on this list, and coming in at the number 2 spot is going to be Magcargo. So Magcargo is another one of these Pokemon that's kind of a spiritual successor to an older version of itself, and this Magcargo is actually almost identical to the old Magcargo, which saw a lot of play, and that's for the ability Smooth Over, which is intact with this new form of Magcargo. So Smooth Over, that's really the reason we are looking at this card here. Once during your turn, before you attack, you may search your deck for a card, shuffle your deck, then put that card on top of it. So pretty simple ability, nothing too flashy. The card doesn't have a great attack, so you might be thinking, well, why is this coming in at the number 2 spot? And that's because there are a ton of cards that can actually combo very well with this ability. Of course, the main one that everyone's been talking about is Zoroark GX. So just to recap, with Zoroark GX has that amazing ability trade. Once during your turn, you can discard a card from your hand and draw 2 cards. So of course this means if you have something like Magcargo, you can search your deck for maybe a double colorless energy to attack with your Zoroark for the turn. Put that double colorless energy on top of your deck, then use trade to draw exactly that double colorless energy and 1 extra card in the process. Or in the case of Zoroark decks pre-rotation, we still have Puzzle of Time. In Puzzle of Time, if you want to make use of its second effect, you need 2 of them in your hand at the same time. And sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to pull off. So let's say you only have 1 in hand, but if you have Magcargo, you can actually get the second Puzzle of Time, put it right on top of your deck, and draw it with trade. So this is an incredible consistency booster, but not just Zoroark. If you remember, we have that Swampert that we mentioned earlier in this countdown list that has a very similar ability to Zoroark GX. You can draw 3 cards, one of which being a card that you put on top of your deck with Smooth Over. There's also a Ludicolo in this set as well that has an ability that lets you draw a card. In the case of the expanded format, we have things like Shaman EX, where you can put a card on top of your deck, then bench a Shaman and refill your hand to a size of 6. And up until now, I've only been mentioning ability-based forms of draw power. We still have things like Scorched Earth in the format, where you can discard a fire energy or fighting energy from your hand to draw 2 cards, Smooth Over, put a card on top, draw one of those cards out of those 2. Or even, let's say you're about to play Professor Sycamore for your turn, but there's 1 key card that you're really needing to maybe pull off a certain combo for your turn. Well, guess what? Smooth Over, put that on top of your deck, and then Professor Sycamore right into it, plus an additional 6 cards with it. And the fact that Magcargo is also just a 1 prize Pokemon, it's not a GX or anything, so if your opponent does manage to take it out, well, guess what? They're only getting 1 prize. That's another reason why this ability is so good. It's not a Pokemon that a lot of the times your opponent might not feel that they can afford to go after, or even if they do, realizing how powerful this ability is, like I said, they're only getting 1 prize, which might still open them up to having to take 3 GX knockouts to win the game as well. There's just so much good to talk about this card. There's so many different potential partners for it, and it just adds a huge consistency boost to any deck that can actually make use of it. And like I said, it's a very simple ability, but it's just so powerful, and that is why it is coming at the number 2 spot on this list. Alrighty guys, so that means coming in at the number 1 spot, probably to no one's surprise, is going to be Rayquaza GX. So there actually was a little bit of discussion amongst us about what actually should be the top card. Magcargo actually was pitched to be the number 1 at one point, but I think one reason Rayquaza GX is going to take this top spot is just because Rayquaza is so powerful, it creates an entire new archetype of its own, whereas Magcargo in a lot of cases is only going to be kind of a support Pokemon to enhance a couple of current strategies. So let's look at it. It is a basic Pokemon GX, 180 hit points, Dragon type, 3 retreat cost, and Fairy Weakness. Fairy Weakness, pretty expected, and is actually something that is pretty decent in the current metagame because Gardevoir has been declining in popularity in recent months due to having a bit of a tricky time with things like Buzzwole GX and Lycanroc GX, which have been populating the metagame for a little while now. But its ability Stormy Winds. Whenever you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may discard the top 3 cards of your deck. If you do, attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to this Pokemon. Its main attack, Dragon Break, for a Grass, Lightning, and Colorless energy is 30 times the amount of basic Grass and Lightning energy attached to all of your Pokemon. And then its GX attack, Tempest GX, for a single Grass energy, discard your hand and draw 10 cards. So a lot of things to go over here, but definitely I think the big highlights of this card are going to be Stormy Winds and Dragon Break. So the fact that we have Stormy Winds as an ability on this card is one reason why I think Rayquaza GX doesn't necessarily need a potential stage 2 partner like a Vikavolt or a Magnezone, just as an example. You can kind of power up your board by yourself, and especially pre-rotation we still have Max Elixir running around. So between Stormy Winds and Max Elixirs, you can actually just get your Rayquazas powered up very, very quickly, which is great because that frees up a lot of deck space that a lot of the other powerful basic attackers don't have the luxury of. So think of something like Duskmane and Crosby GX. Up until now, the majority of its success has been as a partner with a Magnezone. Magnezone is a stage 2, however, which is a little bit clunky sometimes. Sometimes you don't get that Magnezone set up, and your setup just kind of crumbles apart without it. So the fact that Rayquaza doesn't really necessarily need those types of partners is definitely an inherent advantage it has over some of these other big basic attackers that require a lot of energy in play to really get going. So that's actually one thing that is great about this card, but nevertheless, I think the fact that it does have a lot of potential partners for it will bode well for it post-rotation as well, because after we lose Max Elixir, we will still have things like Vikavolt or Magnezone, or even the Manectric that came out in Celestial Storm as well. So I think Rayquaza GX has potential in both pre and post rotation, which is another reason why it's kind of being solidified here as the #1 spot here. But Dragon Break, let's just do the math on this. If we have 6 energy in play, we're doing 180 damage, and that's not factoring in Fighting Fury Belt, or in the case of post rotation, we only have Choice Band or other tool cards to work with. And 6 energy, it sounds like a lot, but you have to figure if you bench a Rayquaza, get an energy on it with Stormy Winds, attach for turn, that's 2 right there, and that's not factoring in additional Rayquazas that you might bench. That's not factoring in Max Elixir or anything else. So even in the case of the quote-unquote turbo style Rayquaza GX deck, it's really, like I said, pretty easy to get this attack up and running, and if your opponent is not quick at shutting this down, you can easily keep ramping up the amount of energy in play, ensuring that you can just take one-hit knockouts the entire game. So this is actually an attack that really forces your opponent to be very aggressive. A lot of times they won't have the luxury of having defensive turns because they really need to concentrate on knocking out your Rayquaza GXs to eliminate energy in play. But even if they do knock out maybe a Rayquaza GX and you lose maybe 3 energy, well, guess what? We still have a Latias Prism Star, which we just touched on not too long ago, which can accelerate energy out of the discard pile to all of your benched basic dragon Pokemon, which is convenient because that is exactly what Rayquaza GX is, a dragon Pokemon, or dragon basic Pokemon, I should say. And then we haven't even mentioned Tempest GX. Now, granted, this is not an attack you will use as frequently as Dragon Break, but this is an insane form of draw power. We've seen Drampa GX see play in the past, with Big Will GX being an attack that has seen a lot of play because it will allow you to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 10 cards. So in some cases, Tempest GX is actually even better because you can dump pointless resources that you can't use on your next turn. And it's just nice if you ever have like a weird turn where your hand is a little bit unworkable, you can just play Tempest GX and dump your hand and refresh your hand size. And especially in the case of post-rotation, we won't have N in the format, so Tempest GX actually can't be disrupted quite as frequently, I think, in the post-rotation format either. So there's just a lot of really solid things going on for this Rayquaza GX. Like I said, it has potential both pre-rotation and post-rotation, and it's just such a huge beat stick and can just run over your opponent, like I said, if they don't get their act together and start knocking out some Rayquazas pretty quickly. So that is why Rayquaza GX is going to take the top spot on this top 10 Celestial Storm cards countdown. So that is going to be our list, guys. Of course, this is all subjective though, so if you think we may have missed a card or you think we maybe ranked a card way too high, feel free to sound off in the comment section below and let us know, what do you think? What are your top 10 favorite cards that came out of this set? Definitely sound off below. Let us know what you're thinking. And also, like I mentioned earlier in the video too, guys, if you want to hear more about the other cards that came out in Celestial Storm, definitely be sure to check out our full set review, and also stay tuned for our top 5 worst Celestial Storm cards. I will have links to both of those videos in the description whenever they go live. But as usual, guys, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you can support this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or by picking up something from our online store at rarecandytcg.com, it would mean a lot. But with that, I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.